on New Zealand. Tonight, we focus on one of New Zealand's greatest tragedies, the sinking of the Wahine. Throughout tonight's show, we will try to find out as much as possible about the disaster so we, as a nation, can begin to understand this terrible tragedy.
On the morning of the 10th of April 1968, after an overnight voyage from Lyttelton, the ferry Wahine encountered the worst of a violent southerly storm, with winds gusting to 160 kilometres per hour while entering the Wellington Harbour. Passengers terrified and feeling very ill indeed. The captain and his crew attempted to get the ship back on course and out of danger. After many hours, the passengers had to abandon ship and were flung out into the rough seas of the harbour in life rafts. They had to make the perilous crossing to Wellington's rocky shores, where they were met by local Wellingtonians despite desperate help. These rescuers could see the state of the harbour and understood how difficult the crossing had become. Perhaps even before those on board had realised, we are lucky enough tonight to have footage recovered of a resident in the seaside village of Eastbourne back in 1968. They were among the many heroic rescuers on that fateful day. Here's Wellington's correspondent, Esther, with her 1968 report.
Hello, I'm Esther, and here we have Chelsea, a very heroic rescuer. Thank you for joining us today. You must be exhausted.
I am.
Approximately how many people did you save?
I think I saved maybe about 11 or 10.
Wow, I couldn't save that many people. Why did you come down to save these people when you could have stayed at home where it was dry, warm, and you were safe?
I reckon it was because I knew it was the right thing to do. I mean, if I was in a shipwreck like the Wahine, then I would want someone to come and rescue me as well, even if it was just a local person.
That's just amazing. Do you feel sorry for Cheryl Hick, who lost 2 of the 3 children she had with her?
Yes, and the rest of the neighbourhood is praying for her.
Thank you. Signing off on this, a very bleak day in New Zealand's history.
An interesting interview. Our thanks to Esther for sending us that old report. Those unfortunate enough to be on the Wahine on the 10th of April 1968 had to deal with a very rough night and day. Many passengers were throwing up continuously on those extremely rough seas. The passengers were all told that the storm would pass and to hold tight. Most thought it was a typical Wellington southerly storm and that the Wahine would ride it out. Unfortunately, at 6:41 a.m, the Wahine was carried onto the rocks of Barrett Reef, sustaining serious damage to the length of her hull. The starboard and the port engine stopped working. The anchors were dropped, but it was some time before they held firm. Rescue attempts were made impossible by the raging gales and massive swells. By early afternoon, all 734 passengers and crew were ordered to abandon ship and get into the life rafts. Only 4 of the 8 rafts could be used because of the angle of the now sinking ship. All 734 people on the ship managed to escape, but due to the stormy seas, 51 lost their lives. We can only imagine what those giant waves looked like to those people in their small life rafts, or worse, for those who had capsized. Our film technicians have found some much damaged footage of 2 survivors filmed only hours after the disaster in a civil defence shelter. We have carefully cleaned and restored the film. This is the first time it has been shown to the New Zealand public. Let's roll that footage now.
I'm Alicia, and today we have our survivor of today's disaster. Explain how you felt when you heard the weather forecast. Do you think the captain made a good decision?
He made a reasonable decision because he didn't know that the storming was going to speed up.
How did you escape this disaster?
I was in my bedroom and shit was started shaking hard and loud noise, so I bring my life jacket and went out.
If you could change one thing, what would you do?
I would try saving my little brother because when I was in sea, I can't reach him.
Back to you, Tom.
That was a fascinating piece of New Zealand history. We are so lucky to have such amazing technology that allows us to still view it. And now let us look at human error being the possible reason for the sinking of the Wahine. Captain Hector Gordon Robson had been master of the ill-fated ferry for some time. He had sailed her to and from Wellington numerous times in strong winds and high seas and was an experienced captain. It was Captain Robertson's decision to enter the harbour when they did. They had arrived 20 minutes behind schedule when freak gusts of 100 knots or more struck the vessel and put them out of line. It was quoted at the time as saying, "If those windows minutes later we would have been through the entrance, could have come down the harbour. We could have come down and dropped anchor in Oriental Bay where it was quite calm." Some people suggested that Captain Robertson was too late in his decision to put the passengers into the life rafts. They had suggested they could have been evacuated much earlier. Captain Robertson, however, feels he made the right decision, saying, "People who say that don't know what they are talking about. If I had put them off any earlier, everyone would have been lost. I would have lost 600 lives on my consequence." In a moment, we will take a closer look at the weather on that fateful day. But now let's look at an interview given by Alex in 1972. This interview may give us some insight as to what was happening on the bridge that day.
Hello, I'm Alex, and joining me today is Captain Quinton.
Hello.
Did you have a lot of pressure on you?
Yes, a lot of pressure, and it was very hard to make the decisions I had made.
What were the changes you had to make?
One of the choices I had to make was going into the harbour, and that was almost impossible without my crew.
If you could go back and do it again, what would you change?
Going into the harbour, I would rather go back out to sea and save lives.
Thank you for your time, Captain Quinton.
You're welcome.
Fascinating old footage there.
Let's take a look at the weather on the 10th of April 1968. It certainly was a terrible day to be stuck outside in New Zealand.
Cyclone Giselle was first reported on the 5th of April 1968 when it hit French Caledonia with storm warning issues throughout New Zealand the next day.
Early on 9th of April, Cyclone Giselle hit Cape Reinga. Winds of up to 160 km an hour caused massive damage to buildings.
Torrential rain flooded farmland in Northland, drowning hundreds of farm animals. A farmer was also killed when he was blown off a haystack.
The cyclone's pattern of damage continued as it traveled across the North Island but turned south down the east coast. Ships were driven ashore and landslips closed roads. Rain caused massive flooding and winds left roofs torn off and windows broken.
By the time Cyclone Giselle hit Wellington on the morning of the 10th of April, another storm had driven up the west coast of the South Island from Antarctica.
The two storms met over the capital, causing huge damage. Winds in Wellington were the strongest ever recorded, at pointing reaching speeds of 275 km an hour.
As the storm moved on to the South Island, hundreds of Christchurch houses lost their roofs, and both the Avon and Heathcote rivers flooded. Throughout Canterbury, over 500 hectares of forest were destroyed.
In Southland, the flooding was the worst since 1913. Some people were stranded on their roofs of their houses and had to be rescued by jet boat.
Giselle finally blew out somewhere in the Southern Ocean.
And there you have it, folks. Perhaps. And there you have it, folks. Perhaps if weather forecasting could have been then what it is now, the Wahine disaster would never have happened. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you. What an incredible storm it must have been. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. We hope...
Next week, when we focus on the Springbok Tour of 1981. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next time. From the whole team at Spotlight on New Zealand.
Goodbye.
And e noho rā. Yeah.